Senator Anne Ruston is here with us, Assistant Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. She's also a small business owner, primary producer, cut flowers, I think, and an irrigator, of course. Born and raised in Renmark and still lives there today. Anne's had several positions in government, state and the federal and private sector, and was the first Chief Executive of the National Wine Centre, which of course is based in Adelaide. We hope she remains in her position, doesn't get picked off. She's also on a listening tour, a wet consultation. She was just flown in from Western Australia, I think, and we're delighted to have her here. Anne.
Thanks very much, Tiki. Can I acknowledge my parliamentary colleague, Sean Edwards? You can probably imagine Sean and I, over the years, have had some very interesting conversations about the wine and grape industry. To David Ridgway, the Shadow Minister for Agriculture, to Simon Berry, and also to Heather Webster. Great to see another girl heading up an agricultural organisation. To Andrew Weeks, to acknowledge him as the Chief Executive of the Winegrape Growers Council of Australia. Tiki, just to fill you in a little bit about the announcement in relation to Broken Hill's water supply. I know my colleague Tim Whetstone had some comments to say this morning, but no, it wasn't a thought bubble. We have been working federally for a very long time to try and deal with what we call the SDL adjustments, which is the water that we are able to the environmental outcomes we're able to achieve without getting water. And these adjustment mechanisms mean that we will not have to take out of productive use up to 650 gigalitres of water, and obviously nobody in this room would, that particular equation would not be lost on. New South Wales put into the SDL adjustment notification in April this year about quite a significant amount of water savings out of Menindee Lakes. And part of that decision required them to come up with a solution for Broken Hill's water supply. The most economic solution in terms of the impact and the capacity for us to get maximum SDL adjustment out of the Menindee Lakes was by them taking water from the Murray, the South Australian Murray. Now, whilst I think we need to get a lot more information out there around what's actually happened here, I am very confident that it was probably the best solution for South Australia because, of course, the water that they will take from the South Australian Murray has to be accounted for. It's not water that's coming off South Australian irrigators or South Australians' allocation. It has to come in from upstream. So New South Wales will have to provide the 10 gigalitres of water that they're intending to offtake from the Murray. They have no choice to do that. So it will not have a negative impact on South Australia. And I must say, one of the other things that's worth noting, having responsibility for the Murray-Darling Basin federally, so I've got responsibility for Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, we need to be very mindful that if we want to go forward with this plan, we have to have the agreement of every one of the basin states. It is a very touchy situation for us to be poking a bear about Menindee Lakes when we are very wedded to the continuation of a freshwater system at the bottom end of the river, and that is the lower lakes. So you'll be pleased to know it's not a thought bubble. It's been very well thought through, and it's been something that has been underway and under investigation for a very, very long time. Anyway, that's not why you invited me here. What I thought I'd do is just give you a couple of minutes about the standard stuff about what I think the federal government's role is in this particular space. And then I'll go on to the things that you obviously want to hear me talk about that are probably somewhat more controversial, my excellent adventure around Australia's wine regions. But I think we're sitting here at the moment and we have in front of us one thing, but whether we view what's in front of us as an opportunity or whether we view it as a challenge is entirely up to us. As far as I'm concerned, having responsibility for the wine industry in the federal government, well, hopefully after the 2nd of July, but certainly until the 2nd of July, I think we've got an amazing opportunity, and I think if we can get the levers right at a federal level, then the opportunities will flow down to everybody, and particularly down to the grape growers. I think we have a role in biosecurity because obviously the opportunities for Australian wine are enormous, but our clean, green, safe image is, and our value proposition of our wine is tremendously important. The last thing that we need to do is to have a biosecurity incursion that damages our reputation as a clean, green producer. The other thing that sort of sits hand in hand with biosecurity is research and development. And I think the government has a massive role, the federal government has a massive role in supporting research and development. I acknowledge the amount of money that's put in by the industry towards your own research and development, and certainly I acknowledge South Australia's disproportionate contribution to research and development in the wine industry because of the size of the industry here. But we're very committed as a federal government to R&D. I mean, Barnaby Joyce announced only this week a joint venture between the cotton industry, but headed up by our very own AGWA, into coming up with inventive digital technology so that we can identify any problems in growth at the earliest possible stage of the production cycle, so we can deal with the issue at an embryonic stage until waiting until it manifests itself into something that's going to be more costly or more damaging to our product. So we think R&D is very important, and hence the reason that we put $700 million into R&D annually through our RDCs. But in addition, we've added another $200 million for the R&D for Profit program that we've got running until 2022. One of the things that has often been brought up with me about talking about the wet is that they think that the reason that it was given to small wine producers was because it gave them assistance in dealing with the economies of scale of the larger producers, which obviously some of the smaller producers aren't able to achieve. I was really delighted in the budget back in May that we were able to announce a suite of initiatives for small business, which allowed to move the cap of the threshold from 2 million to 10 million, because so many of our businesses, small businesses these days, probably turn over more than $2 million. It doesn't mean to say they're making massive profits, but the turnover is generating. Was excluding them from being able to get access to all of the small business initiatives like the $20,000 instant write-offs, and also in this particular budget the tax rate reductions. Market access is the other really big one that I think that we've got a really great track record. I'm very proud of the fact that we've been able to negotiate a number of free trade arrangements, most particularly with China, Korea and Japan. And these opportunities, I think, are probably the reason why we're at the threshold of whether we deal with this as a challenge or deal with this as an opportunity. If we can make the pathways to market for our great Australian wine industry as easy as possible, and we can get as much of our wine exported at a price that is going to be sustainable and will deliver good profits and good returns, not just to the winemakers, but also back to the farm gate for grape growers, then I think we'll have done an amazing thing. We've put the first part of it in place by putting the FTAs in place, but now the really hard work comes with us working together with the wine industry and the grape industry about how we're actually going to create those pathways to market. It would be remiss of me not to mention that I think that labour and labour supply policy is something that's going to be extraordinarily important for the ability for the wine industry to be able to realise what it needs to realise, and consequently for you to be able to realise better returns at the farm gate. And that's not to talk about the backpacker tax. Whilst it has been a really uncomfortable thing for the government, and something that I think, leading up to an election, no government would like to have had in the newspaper, the one really, really good thing it has done is highlighted that one of the biggest challenges I think we face in Australia, particularly from an agricultural perspective, has going to be a reliable and secure source of labour into the future. Unfortunately, there are not too many Australians who are happy about going and picking a watermelon in 40 degrees in Mataranka, but surprisingly there are people that are visiting us from overseas that are happy to do so. We need to make sure that we don't disincentivise them from wanting to do that. So over the next few months, we have been given the opportunity to have a very thorough investigation into what the labour supply requirements are for agriculture, and hopefully by, should we be re-elected, hopefully by about October, we'll be in a position to be able to start putting some things in place to ensure that the labour supply that many of us in this room need, I employ backpackers and I'm sure many of you do too, but so that we can have a security into that long-term resource that we need. And finally, taxation policy. As Tiki mentioned, I have been doing a tour around all the wine regions of Australia. Just come back from Western Australia, been to Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales, and I'm heading off to Griffith tomorrow. So this may well be the last time anybody sees me alive. But, so take the photo now. But the thing that has actually probably been most interesting in the entire process that, just to give you a little bit of background, obviously you're well aware that it was the Winemakers Federation and the Grape Growers Association, along with the peak bodies in each of the states, that came to government back in 2014 and said there was a distortion being created in the marketplace by the way the wet rebate was being managed and accessed, and that they sought for us to make some significant policy changes to enable them to be able to get that distortion out of the domestic marketplace and start focusing where we needed to be focusing, and that was overseas. The proposal came in. Subsequent to that, there was a consultative group put together to have a look over that particular proposal, and that came up with a reasonably similar set of recommendations about changing the definition of what eligible wine was, changing the definition of who should be entitled to get it, the removal of bulk and unbranded wine, the more difficult one actually getting rid of New Zealand's ability to claim, and also to put incentive and investment into the international marketplace so that we could start changing the direction of the focus of the Australian wine industry. Through a whole series of machinations and procrastinations and deliberations, we ended up on budget night with something that probably, even I will admit, wasn't perfect. However, we made the statement at the time that we were going to go out to industry and consult and find out what the details of this particular package needed to be so that we could deliver the outcomes that the Australian wine industry were seeking to achieve by these changes. What I have to say is the first thing I've asked the regions when I've gone to see them is, what is it that you think that the rebate is trying to achieve? Well, I think I've visited about 14 wine regions and I've got 14 different answers. And that's just asking them what it is that they want the rebate to achieve. So then the next dilemma obviously is in the details of the proposed package. Now, I would have thought that the most important issue that we have got to deal with collectively is going to be who's eligible for the wet rebate in the longer term. So what does an eligible producer look like? I know in the budget papers it said that you had to own a winery. I can assure you, even though I have absolutely no authority to do anything at all during caretaker mode, that should we be re-elected on the 2nd of July, that will not be the definition of who's eligible. But in a sense, that's pretty much all I can say, because once again, every single wine region and every single group of people that I've spoken to have given me a different definition of what they think eligibility should look like. You know, some people think that everybody should be eligible. Some people think that you should only be eligible if you've got a cellar door. Some people think you should only be eligible if you operate in a region and it's through your primary source of income. So there's just this absolute myriad of different things that people think should be eligible. And I mean, we all understand, you know, everything looks like it looks depending on where you stand. But it does highlight a really significant issue, and that is, where are we going to go as the Australian wine and grape industry if we actually can't come up with a united voice on something as important as taxation reform? I'm reasonably committed. If I spent as much time on all my other portfolio responsibilities as I do on the wine part of my portfolio, I probably wouldn't get to sleep at all, because I've actually made a commitment that I'm going to work at a level of detail and to try and get across this so I can come up with the best possible outcome. But I have not been able to go to the Winemakers Federation, because every second person I speak to, or probably every person I speak to, says the Winemakers Federation doesn't represent me. Well, the Winemakers Federation is only a name. It's a structure that is enshrined in legislation as a prescribed body for the purposes of the federal government for consultation. So it is just a body. It is not people. It belongs to the wine industry. And equally, I would say, in terms of the Winegrape Growers Council or Winegrape Growers Australia, it's exactly the same thing. It is your body. So to come to me and say, well, they don't represent me, well, it's like, so whose problem's that? It's not mine. So the dilemma that I'm faced now going forward is, how do I make a decision about where we need to land these wet reforms? You know, when are we going to introduce the removal of eligibility for bulk and unbranded wine? How are we going to determine eligibility? How do I actually go about consulting with the wine industry? I can't, and nor can any other federal minister, be reasonably expected to go and speak to every interest group in an industry to try and come up with a determination. And then all I end up doing is I go back to Canberra, and if I had a matrix sitting in front of me saying, okay, who wanted the wet to be retained, who wanted the wet to be removed, and who wanted it somewhere in the middle, who wanted the wet to remain on bulk wine, who wanted to be taken off. I've even got somebody telling me there's good bulk wine and bad bulk wine. So, you know, where do I make the decision there? You know, so I will go back to Canberra, and in the absence of any ability for the industry to get together and come back to me in the formal consultation stage, should I be lucky enough to be firstly re-elected and secondly remain as the minister responsible for the wine industry, I'm going to have to make the decision about where I make and draw the line. And I'm not necessarily sure, despite all my best intentions and my genuine interest and commitment to the wine industry, that I'm the right person or the best person to be making that decision. And so I say that not because you necessarily specifically are the wine industry, although I'm sure there's many in here who are involved directly in the wine industry, and many of you probably claim the wet rebate. Have a think about what it looks like for you. But the same thing happens in the grape industry, and that is unless you have got a strong and united voice at the regional level, at the state level and at the federal level, you run the risk of ending up with a situation where somebody who has got not necessarily any understanding, any experience or any background in your industry making decisions on your behalf, and I think that's a very, very dangerous thing to be doing. In terms of the decision in relation to some of the changes to the wet rebate that I think are pertinent to the wine industry specifically, and I put this out here as questions, and I'd be really interested for Heather or anybody in the room who wants to feed back some responses to some of these comments. I'd be very keen to hear your views. One of the really weird anomalies about the payment of the rebate is that you can actually get paid a rebate for a tax that you haven't paid. The wet rebate is actually able to be quoted off up the supply chain, understandably because it's paid at a wholesale level. So if we want to get the rebate to the people on the ground, the people with the investment in the region, investment in the industry, investment in the brand particularly, we may not necessarily be able to do that if we're paying it it's being paid at a wholesale level. But just have a think about what the damage is done in terms of the downward pressure on grape prices by the fact that we're able to quote off and claim a tax that we haven't paid. And in the case in this room, I mean, I'm not going to ask you to stick your hands up, but I would imagine there are a number of people in this room who are able to claim the wet rebate as grape growers, and there'll be a number of people in this room who aren't. There is an unlevel playing field just by that mere fact. And the other issue that has been constantly raised is the fact that because there is so much cheap wine around, the wineries and the winemakers don't need to come direct to the grape growers anymore. They can completely bypass you because at the end of the season, when they decide they need X amount to top up, or they want to trade, or they want to do something where they need to get, they would normally have had to come to you and ask you for your grapes, they're just going to some bulk wine producer and just buying the wine directly from them. Hence the continuous downward pressure on prices. So that's where we're sitting at the moment in terms of the decision making that has to happen in the next little while about what's going to happen with the fine details of the wet rebate. So can I challenge you to think very seriously about your industry and about how you can best deliver an outcome for the South Australian wine grape growers, but most particularly thinking about what is going to be the model or the structure that's going to stand everybody in the best state, will stand the test of time. I've always been a great believer in the federated model because it comes up from the bottom. I like regional associations that deal with regional issues, and then they individually feed into your state-based bodies, they deal with your state-based issues, and then your state bodies then sit on a federal council and that deals with the federal body, federal issues, hence taxation, biosecurity, market access, Brand Australia, as I think Peter mentioned. Simon mentioned. But what I would say is there is a further challenge down the road for us. I mean, your industry exists for no other reason than making wine. So an amalgamation between the grape and wine industries in Australia seems to me, or at least an association or some formal linkage between your industry and the wine-making industry, strikes me as being a reasonably sensible thing to go forward. And finally, my pet project, which I've done in all of the areas that I've got responsibility, I do not understand why the Australian Wine and Grape Authority is a statutory authority. The Australian Wine and Grape Authority is actually a body that is charged with the responsibility of conducting your market research, your research and development, but you're also your international market access, whether it be selling wine overseas, wine tourism, etc. You are best placed, along with your colleagues who are the wine industry, in informing that particular body about what you should and shouldn't do. And I would be very supportive if the decision was made, or you as an industry thought you were in a strong enough position and you had a good enough relationship with the winemakers of Australia to enable you to take over a greater share of the responsibility of the administration of the Australian Wine and Grape Authority. So in conclusion, I think I look at what's before us and I see huge opportunity. It's not without its challenges, but I think if we continually look at things and see them as challenges or see them as obstacles, that's exactly what they'll be. But if we decide that we're going to look at them as challenges and we're going to get together and we're going to agree on what we can agree on and we're going to park what we don't agree on, I think we've got a huge future for the Australian wine industry, and I really hope after the 2nd of July that I continue to be able to represent you at a federal level. So thank you very much.